They say the best way to see a person's soul is to watch how they treat someone who can do absolutely nothing for them. Most people in this building think I'm here to clean up their mess, but they don't realize I'm actually here to decide who keeps their job and who loses everything by sunset. In a world where everyone is chasing a title, we often forget that the most powerful person in the room is rarely the one wearing the crown. My name is Arthur, and for 30 years, I built an empire that most men only dream of. But today, I'm not wearing a $3,000 suit. I'm wearing a janitor's uniform. I've spent the last 12 hours watching the people I hired, the vanguards of my legacy, and what I've seen is a truth that most billionaires are too shielded to witness. By the time this hour is up, you're going to see the exact moment a single act of cruelty turned a $1 million promotion into a one-way ticket to the street. Pay close attention to the man in the corner that everyone is ignoring, because he's about to change the lives of everyone in this room forever. Arthur moved silently through the towering glass building, his worn boots echoing faintly against polished marble floors, as executives in tailored suits brushed past him without a second glance, their conversations filled with numbers, power, and ambition, completely unaware that the man they ignored was the very foundation of everything they were fighting for. For 12 hours he observed them closely, the sharpness in their voices, the impatience in their gestures, the subtle arrogance that came from believing they had already made it to the top. And with every passing minute, Arthur felt the weight of a truth he had long suspected but never truly witnessed. Respect in this place was not earned through character, but demanded through status. And without the title, without the suit, without the recognition, a man became invisible, disposable, insignificant. He watched as one young employee struggled under pressure, clearly overwhelmed yet desperate to prove himself, only to be dismissed harshly by a senior manager whose cruelty seemed effortless, almost routine. A small moment that most would overlook, but one that struck Arthur deeply because it revealed everything about the kind of leadership his empire had unknowingly nurtured. Time moved forward, and as the hour approached its end, tension quietly built beneath the surface. Decisions were being finalized, promotions whispered about behind closed doors, futures hanging by threads no one could see. And then came the moment. The same manager, confident and assured of his rise, crossed a line he could not see, humiliating the young employee in front of others, turning a simple mistake into a public spectacle, unaware that every word, every tone, every choice was being measured by the very man he had. Dismissed as nothing, Arthur stepped forward at last, breaking the invisible barrier that had kept him in the shadows, his voice calm yet carrying a weight that silenced the room instantly. And in that single moment, confusion turned into realization as eyes shifted. Whispers spread, and the truth began to unfold. The janitor was not a janitor, the man they ignored was not powerless, and the crown they were chasing was never the source of real power. Arthur revealed himself not with anger, but with clarity, explaining that leadership was not about authority but responsibility, not about control but character, and that in one careless act of cruelty, a man had not only lost a promotion worth millions, but had proven himself unworthy of any position of trust. The room stood frozen as the consequences were delivered. The manager's confidence shattered into disbelief, while the young employee who had been humiliated moments before was now seen in a completely different light, not as weak, but as resilient, not as incapable, but as someone who had endured without losing his dignity. Arthur's gaze moved across the room, not with pride, but with disappointment, because what he had witnessed in a single day reflected years of unnoticed culture, a system where power had replaced empathy and success had overshadowed humanity. And as he turned to leave, his final words lingered heavier than any decision he had made. Titles can be given, money can be earned, but character is revealed when no one is watching. And today, more than one person had shown exactly who they truly were. Arthur didn't leave immediately. Instead, he paused at the doorway as the silence behind him grew heavier, almost suffocating, because the weight of his words had begun to settle into every corner of the room, and for the first time, the people who once moved with confidence now stood uncertain, questioning everything they thought they knew about power and success. Slowly, he turned back, his eyes scanning the faces of those he had trusted for years, seeing not titles or achievements, but choices, patterns, and the quiet truths that had revealed themselves over the past 12 hours. And without raising his voice, he began again, explaining that what they had just witnessed was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a deeper problem. a culture that rewarded results at any cost, while ignoring the human cost behind those results. He spoke about the small moments they overlooked, the dismissive tones, the ignored greetings, the subtle ways people measured worth based on position rather than integrity, and how those moments, repeated over time, had shaped an environment where cruelty could exist without consequence. Until now, the manager, who had once stood tall, now struggled to hold his composure, attempting to justify his actions, calling them pressure, standards, leadership. But Arthur cut through every excuse with quiet precision, reminding him that pressure does not create character. It reveals it, and what had been revealed today could not be ignored or rewritten. Then Arthur shifted his attention to the young employee, the same one who had been humiliated, and asked him a simple question. "Why did you stay silent?" And the answer, hesitant but honest, echoed deeper than anything else in the room. Because he believed speaking up would cost him everything he had worked for. And in that answer, Arthur found the clearest proof that fear had replaced respect in his own company. The room grew even quieter as Arthur acknowledged that failure was not in making mistakes, but in creating a system where people were afraid to be human, afraid to learn, afraid to speak. And that kind of system was destined to collapse, no matter how profitable it appeared on the surface. One by one, he began addressing others in the room, recalling moments from the day, someone who ignored a struggling colleague, someone who took credit for work that wasn't theirs, someone who treated support staff as invisible. And with each example, the illusion of perfection crumbled further, replaced by an uncomfortable but necessary truth. Finally, Arthur made it clear that change would not come through speeches or promises, but through action, immediate and undeniable. And with that, he restructured roles on the spot, removing authority from those who had misused it and elevating those who had demonstrated integrity even in silence, including the young employee who, despite everything, had not allowed the environment to change who he was. As security escorted the former manager out, not in anger, but in consequence, Arthur turned once more to the room and reminded them that power is never proven by how many people follow you, but by how many people feel safe because of you. And as he walked away this time, there was no applause, no celebration, only reflection, because every person in that room understood that what had just happened was not just a decision, it was a reset. And from that moment forward, nothing in that building would ever be the same again. The room remained frozen long after Arthur left, but the stillness wasn't empty. It was heavy with realization, the kind that forces people to confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. And for the first time, no one rushed to speak, no one checked their phones, no one tried to regain control of the moment, because control itself had just been redefined. In the hours that followed, the ripple effect of Arthur's decision began to spread through the building. Quiet at first, then undeniable, as departments whispered about what had happened, how a single moment of cruelty had dismantled years of assumed authority, and how the invisible man they had ignored had seen everything. The young employee who had once stood silently under pressure now found himself in a position he never expected, not just elevated in title, but seen, truly seen, for the first time. Yet even in that moment, he carried himself with the same humility that had gone unnoticed before, and that alone set him apart more than any promotion ever could. Meanwhile, those who had relied on status rather than substance began to feel the shift beneath their feet, realizing that the rules they had comfortably played by were no longer in effect, that every interaction, every decision, every word now carried weight beyond performance metrics. Arthur, on the other hand, retreated back into observation, but this time not as a hidden figure testing his people, but as a leader rebuilding something he had unintentionally allowed to decay, spending the next days walking through offices without disguise, speaking less but seeing more, recognizing those who adapted not out of fear but out of understanding, and those who struggled because their identity had been too closely tied to power rather than purpose. Slowly, a new culture began to form, not perfect, not immediate, but real, where respect was no longer a performance for superiors, but a habit practiced with everyone, from executives to janitors, where people started listening more than speaking, helping more than competing, and where leadership was no longer defined by who commanded the room, but by who could carry responsibility without losing their humanity. Yet the most profound change wasn't visible in meetings or reports. It lived in the small, almost invisible moments. A manager pausing to ask an employee if they were okay, a colleague choosing to support rather than outshine, a simple acknowledgement of someone who would have once been ignored. And those moments, repeated consistently, began to rebuild what had been broken. Arthur knew this wasn't the end of the test, because character isn't proven in a single day, but in what people choose to do when the moment passes and no one is watching anymore. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to certainty, not in the empire he had built, but in the possibility that it could become something greater than profit or power. And as he stood once more in the same lobby where he had first walked in as a janitor, he watched the same marble floors, the same rushing employees, but this time something was different. Because now when someone passed by the cleaning staff, they didn't just walk past. They nodded, they acknowledged, they respected, and that small change, almost invisible to the outside world, was the clearest sign that everything had, in fact, changed forever.